What is happiness? The etymology of the word happiness comes from the term good fortune or good hap, which meant more literally pleasant and contented mental state. When considering happiness, we come across a question. What is happiness? The answer appears straightforward, however, a problem becomes evident when we are asking it as thinkers. It has no seemingly straightforward answer. So philosophers have discussed this problem and asked, what are the important meanings of the term and how do they connect? Happiness can be seen in two senses. One as a state of mind, and two as a life going well for the person leading it. With the above two senses in mind, our questions can be formulated. Those two questions may appear like, what is the state of mind called happiness? And what is the subjective experience known as happiness? Our first sense of happiness takes the matter psychologically. As a state of mind, our concern for happiness breaks down into two ways, the scientific and the philosophical. Some science, such as psychology, might approach happiness from a neuroscientific perspective, such as varying chemical processes in the brain that contribute to the mental state known as happiness. While other psychologists might try to understand happiness as a sense of well-being. Philosophers of Eastern thought also utilize the state of mind viewpoint when talking about ataraxia. To put it into perspective, psychology is concerned with how happiness works as a state of mind. Some philosophers speak of happiness in this manner and are no different. The state of mind approach leaves us with much information, and there are some notable answers, but the thinkers in this area of thought might follow up with another question. How valuable is the mental state known as happiness? In the second sense, happiness is being approached as a subjective value. That is, something that some consider important while others might not. When philosophers speak on the value of happiness, they speak of it as a prudential value. They might use terms like well-being, welfare, utility, or flourishing. In this sense, happiness might be concerned with what benefits a person, what serves the person's interest, or perhaps what is most desirable for that person's sake. In another sense, other philosophers might take this value to say it is weakness, meaning only idiots experience happiness. In this case, happy people are to be pitied when compared to the highly intelligent. With all that in mind, a person might be able to understand the subjective experience called happiness from different perspectives. Maybe that person might ask, what sort of life benefits a person? Or perhaps they might be concerned with the source of happiness. In either case, sticking to the two senses of happiness spoken of earlier will be important in keeping clarity on the matter. Putting the science aside, let us examine some philosophical aspects to happiness. Many philosophers have spoken about happiness in these two senses. Some notable philosophers come to mind, including David Hume and Michel de Montaigne. In the first sense of happiness, David Hume discusses perception in his work An Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and essayist. He is well known for his philosophical work in empiricism and skepticism. Hume strove to create a naturalistic science of man which examined the psychological basis of human nature. In his previously mentioned work, Hume draws an important distinction about impressions that is pertinent in recognizing how human emotions and ideas, such as happiness, operate within the mind. According to Hume, an impression would be akin to a feeling, or sensing, whereas ideas are more like thinking. Getting away from ideas, perceptions also break down into two parts, sensation and reflection. A sensation might be described as an immediate feeling derived from the environment. A reflection is a feeling derived from an experience of our mind. Happiness, according to Hume, would be a reflection. Reflections like happiness come from our sensation equivalents, which we might call pleasure, satisfaction, or fulfillment. Hume makes a notable quote that explains his position on happiness. The great end of all human industry is the attainment of happiness. For this were arts invented, sciences cultivated, laws ordained, and societies modeled, by the most profound wisdom of patriots and legislators. Even the lonely savage who lies exposed to the inclemency of the elements and the fury of wild beasts forgets not for a moment this grand object of his being. Therefore, Hume approaches happiness as a form of passion or an impression which reflects our sentiments. However, one cannot suddenly reflect upon themselves and obtain happiness. Instead, Hume says there are a few examples of reflections that can tranquilize and soften all the passions. While reflections can sometimes tranquilize the passions, they must work in nature, not independently of it. He elaborates clearly, saying, "By habit and study acquire the philosophical temper which both gives force to reflection and by rendering a great part of your happiness independent, takes off the edge from all disorderly passions, and tranquilizes the mind. Despise not these helps, but confide not too much in them either, unless nature has been favorable in temper which she has endowed you." Altogether, Hume sees happiness as a state of mind which requires moderation. Our moderation comes from our reflections as well as how we deal in nature. According to Hume, how a person approaches this is through philosophy. Hume enumerates this position by calling philosophy as a sort of medicine of the mind, where one can relinquish certain viewpoints such as religion and superstition. In the second sense of happiness, Montaigne writes an essay on solitude, which concerns happiness as an experience from the self. Montaigne lived during a time of religious civil war in France, which gave rise to his reflections on how to handle a world gone mad. Montaigne was a middle-class lawyer and a civil servant of the king. He was a man loathed by both sides of the Catholic Huguenot wars. Some of his works, such as the Essays, reveal Montaigne to be a Stoic and a skeptic, with his allegiance to none but reason alone. In his shorter essay on solitude, Montaigne takes Stoic acceptance of the stupidity of society while divulging on the wisdom of living a life of imagination and virtue. This is not solitude by a strict definition, so Montaigne means solitude in the sense of being separated from the crowd. The book further elaborates on the disdain for ambition, aloofness in war, and the tragic sense of life. Here is one passage I really enjoy. "We must reserve a back shop all our own, entirely free, in which to establish our real liberty and our principal retreat and solitude." In this sense, Montaigne rejects the temptations of wealth, fame, glory, reputation, and even the glow that accompanies the worldly man into his autumn years. He continues, "We should have wife, children, goods, and above all, health if we can. But we must not bind ourselves to them so strongly that our happiness depends on them. We must do like the animals that rub out their traces at the same entrance to their lairs. Seek no longer that the world should speak of you, but how you should speak to yourself. Retire into yourself, but first be prepared to receive yourself there. It would be madness to trust in yourself if you do not know how to govern yourself. Borrow nothing except yourself, arrest your mind, and fix it on definite and limited thoughts, and rest content with them without any desire to prolong life and reputation." However, all these viewpoints assume that happiness exists at all. Does it?